I will never forget the day my life took an unexpected turn. My name is Emma, and until recently, I thought I was living a fairy tale. 2 years ago, I married Liam, the man I thought was the love of my life. I came from a humble background, orphaned since adolescence and used to fighting for every achievement in my life. When I met Liam, a successful young professional, I felt like the pieces of my life were finally falling into place. I grew up on the outskirts of Valencia, in a working-class neighborhood where every day was a battle. My parents died in a car accident when I was 15, leaving me in the care of an aunt who could barely support herself. Since then, I learned that if I wanted something in life, I would have to earn it through my own efforts. I worked hard in school, got scholarships, and finally managed to get into college. It was there, in the cafeteria of the Faculty of Economics, where I met Liam. He was everything I was not, self-confident, from a good family, with a bright future ahead of him. Our meeting was like those movie scenes that I liked to see so much when I was little. I was struggling with a coffee machine that refused to give me my daily dose of caffeine, when Liam walked up with a charming smile and, with a well-aimed tap, got the machine working. "Magic," he said, winking at me. From that moment on, I was in love with him. Our relationship moved quickly. Liam was attentive, loving, and didn't seem to care about my humble background. He took me to elegant restaurants, introduced me to his friends from Valencian high society, and made me feel as if I belonged to that world. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a place to belong, someone who valued me for who I was. However, the first crack in our fairy tale appeared when I met Margaret, Liam's mother. I will never forget that dinner in the luxurious penthouse overlooking the port of Valencia. Margaret, an elegant woman in her 50s, greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So you're the girl my son talks so much about," he said, scanning me up and down with a look that made me feel completely out of place. Throughout the evening, Margaret kept making subtly disparaging comments about my accent, my clothes, and even my career choice. "Oh, you study teaching? How lovely. I've always thought it was such a noble profession," he said in a tone that suggested the opposite. Liam didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he chose not to. Every time I looked in his direction for support, he would simply smile and change the subject. Despite this unpromising start, I was determined to win Margaret's affections. After all, she was the mother of the man she loved. In the months that followed, I tried my best to fit into their world. I learned to cook elaborate dishes, I offered to help organize their charity events, I even started secretly taking etiquette classes. All in the hope that one day Margaret would see me as an equal, as someone worthy of her son. But nothing seemed to be enough. Every gesture on my part was met with a cold smile and often a biting comment. "Oh, Emma, dear, don't bother. I'm sure you've done your best," he would say when presenting her with a dish he had spent hours preparing. "Or how thoughtful of you to offer to help. I guess you're used to this kind of task," when I offered to help with the cleanup after one of their parties. Liam, for his part, seemed to live in a bubble of denial. Every time I tried to talk to him about his mother's behavior, he would reassure me with, "It's just her way, love. She'll get used to you." But I knew, deep in my heart, that Margaret would never fully accept me. As the months passed, the strain on our relationship began to become evident. Liam began spending more time at work, coming home late and often too tired to talk. I found myself increasingly alone, caught between my desire to please my husband and mother-in-law, and the growing sense that I was losing my identity in the process. I remember one particularly difficult night. We had been invited to a charity gala organized by Liam's company. I spent weeks searching for the perfect dress, something that made me feel elegant but didn't look like I was trying too hard. When we arrived at the event, Margaret was already there, surrounded by her friends from Valencian high society. When he saw us, he approached with that fake smile that I already knew so well. "Oh, Emma, dear. That dress is interesting. Is it second-hand?" she asked with false innocence. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks as Margaret's friends snickered. I met Liam's gaze, hoping that this time he would finally say something. But he simply excused himself to go greet some colleagues, leaving me alone to face the humiliation. It was at that moment that I began to realize that the fairy tale I thought I was living in was quickly turning into a nightmare. The man I thought would protect and love me unconditionally seemed more interested in pleasing his mother and keeping up appearances than in defending his wife. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. I tried to talk to Liam several times, to express how I felt, but he always found a way to avoid the conversation. "You're exaggerating, Emma," he told me. "My mother only wants the best for us." But I knew that wasn't the case. Margaret didn't want the best for us, he wanted the best for Liam, and in his mind, I wasn't part of that ideal future. I began to feel like an intruder in my own marriage, in my own life. The dreams I once had of building a happy family with Liam began to fade, replaced by the harsh reality that I might never be good enough for this world I had tried so hard to belong to. Looking back, I realized that I was so focused on trying to fit in, on being the perfect wife and daughter-in-law, that I had lost sight of who I really was. The Emma who had once fought against all odds to get ahead, the strong, determined girl who had earned her place at university through hard work and perseverance, seemed to have vanished, replaced by a version of myself that was constantly searching the approval of others. But the real breaking point was yet to come. An event that would shake the foundations of my life and force me to face the harsh reality of my situation. A day that would change everything and make me question every decision I had made in recent years. Little did I know that I would soon face a public humiliation that would test my strength like never before and force me to make decisions I never thought I would have to make. The day everything fell apart began like any other rainy Saturday in Valencia. He had been working overtime at the small neighborhood market where he had gotten a job, trying to save some money to surprise Liam with a special dinner. I wanted to show him that, despite the difficulties, I was still committed to our marriage. I clearly remember the sound of rain hitting the pavement as I walked home. The grey sky seemed to reflect the mood that had accompanied me for the past few weeks. As I approached our house, an uneasy feeling began to grow in my stomach. Something didn't feel right. As we turned the corner of our street, my heart stopped. There, scattered all over the front yard, were all my belongings. Clothes, books, photographs, everything that belonged to me lay soaked on the grass. For a moment, I thought I was having a nightmare. This couldn't be real. With trembling steps, I approached the entrance. It was then that I saw Margaret, standing in the doorway, a triumphant smile on her face. "A poor, dirty girl like you has no place in the house of our dreams," he shouted, his voice echoing in the deserted street. "I've already done too much tolerating your presence here. You managed to fool my son, but not me. Stop it. Get out of my house." Margaret's words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I felt like the world was spinning around me. I couldn't believe what was happening. This must be a mistake, I thought desperately. Liam would never allow this. I tried to argue, to explain that this was my house too, that Liam and I were married. But Margaret was relentless. "Ah, my dear boy finally realized that you were never good enough. Thank God he now sees the truth," Margaret exclaimed in a mocking tone that chilled my blood. As I was trying to process what was happening, I heard the sound of a car approaching. It was Liam's car. A wave of relief washed over me. Surely he would put an end to this madness. I ran towards him as soon as he got out of the vehicle, expecting to see indignation on his face, expecting him to defend me. But what I saw left me cold. Liam had an expression of indifference, almost boredom. "You know what my mother is like, Emma," he said casually, as if all of this were insignificant. There was no surprise in his voice, no anger, not even shame. At that moment, I realized that he knew. He had allowed this to happen. The world stopped around me. I felt like I was short of breath. Tears began to well up in my eyes, blurring my vision. Everything I had believed in, everything I had fought for in the last few years, was crumbling in front of me. I felt small, insignificant, as if the entire weight of the world fell on my shoulders. On shaky legs, I began to pick up my things from the wet floor. Every object I touched reminded me of a moment in my life, a dream I had had, a hope that was now fading. Photos from our wedding, now stained by the rain. The dress I had worn on our first date, covered in mud. Books he had treasured for years, their pages swollen with moisture. As I gathered my belongings, I could feel the eyes of the neighbors. Some watched from behind their curtains, others had gone out into their gardens, pretending to perform tasks but clearly fascinated by the spectacle. The shame I felt at that moment was overwhelming. I, who had always fought to hold my head high, to prove my worth, was being publicly humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. Margaret was still standing in the doorway, watching with barely concealed satisfaction. Liam had entered the house, avoiding facing the situation that he himself had allowed. I felt completely alone, abandoned by the man who had sworn to love and protect me. Through tears, I managed to stuff most of my things into some bags and an old suitcase I found in the mess. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay another minute in that place. As I walked away down the sidewalk, carrying what little was left of my life, I heard Margaret's voice one last time. "And don't you ever come back, you hear me? You were never welcome here." I walked aimlessly through the streets of Valencia, the rain mixing with my tears. The weight of my belongings seemed to increase with each step, as did the weight of the betrayal I had just suffered. The streets that had once seemed welcoming to me now felt cold and hostile. I passed coffee shops where Liam and I had shared laughter, parks where we had dreamed of our future. Every corner of the city seemed to mock my naivety. Finally, when my legs couldn't take it anymore, I found myself in front of a small hotel on the outskirts of the city. It was a modest place, nothing like the fancy establishments Liam used to take me to. But at the time, it was all I could afford. With shaking hands, I paid for a room with the little money I had in my pocket. The room was small and somewhat shabby, but clean and dry. I dropped my things on the floor and collapsed on the bed. For the first time since I had seen my belongings in the garden, I allowed myself to really cry. I cried for the love I thought I had, for the dreams that had been shattered, for the trust one had placed in people who didn't deserve it. As the hours passed, lying in that unfamiliar bed, I began to mentally relive the events of the day. Margaret's cruelty, Liam's indifference, the shame of being kicked out of my own home. But I also remembered who I was before I met them. The strong girl who had overcome the loss of her parents, who had fought for her education, who had never given up in the face of adversity. It was in that moment, in the solitude of that hotel room, that I made a decision. This wouldn't be the end of my story. I wouldn't let Liam and Margaret define who I was or what my future would be. This humiliation, however painful, would be the starting point for a new life. With that resolution in mind, I pulled out a notebook from my things and started writing. I wrote about my feelings, about what had happened, but also about what I wanted for my future. Plans that previously seemed unattainable were now presented as real possibilities. Maybe, I thought, this was the opportunity one needed to pursue my own dreams, without the shadow of others' expectations of me. As the night progressed, I felt a strange calm come over me. The pain was still there, of course, and I knew it would take time to heal. But with him there was something else, a spark of hope, a glimmer of the determination that had always been a part of me. Before going to sleep, I went to the bedroom window. The rain had stopped, and among the dispersing clouds, I could see some stars. They reminded me that even on the darkest nights, there is always light if you know where to look. That night, as I fell asleep in a strange bed, heartbroken but spirit intact, I knew that the next day would begin a new chapter in my life. It wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face whatever came. Because if I had learned anything from this experience, it was that true strength does not come from others, but from oneself. And so, with a mix of fear and determination, I prepared to take the first step towards my new life, a life in which I would be the protagonist of my own story, without depending on anyone else to define my worth or my happiness. Dawn found me sitting on the edge of the bed in that modest hotel on the outskirts of Valencia. I had slept little, but I felt strangely energized. The decision he had made the night before to start a new life felt more real in the light of day. I knew the road would not be easy, but I was determined to follow it. The first thing I did was take an inventory of what I had. My possessions were reduced to what I had managed to rescue from the garden: some clothes, some books, and a few personal items. My financial situation was precarious. The little money I had would barely be enough for a few more days in the hotel. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. I decided to start with the basics: a place to live and a job. I knew I couldn't afford to be picky, so I started looking for rooms for rent in the most affordable neighborhoods in Valencia. After several calls and visits to places I would rather forget, I finally found a small room in a shared apartment in the Cabanel neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was clean and tea. The landlady, an older woman named Dolores, seemed sympathetic to my situation. "Look, little girl," Dolores told me with a warm smile, "we've all been through tough times. If you need a little more time to pay the first month, I'll understand." Their kindness moved me to tears. It was the first gesture of kindness he had received in what seemed like an eternity. With a roof over my head, at least temporarily, I focused on finding work. My experience in the market helped me get a position in a grocery store near my new home. The salary was minimal, but it was a start. I also started distributing advertising on the weekends to earn a little more. The days were long and exhausting, but every euro I earned made me feel one step further away from the life I had left behind. The first few weeks were an emotional roller coaster. There were moments when I felt invincible, proud of every small achievement. Other days, the magnitude of what I had lost hit me hard. In those moments, I found myself crying on the small bed in my room, wondering if I had made the right decision. It was in one of those moments of doubt that I remembered something my father used to tell me. "Emma, life doesn't always give you what you want, but it always gives you what you need to grow." Those words resonated in my mind, giving me the strength to keep going. Little by little, I began to establish a new routine. I got up early, worked hard during the day, and at night, I studied. I had decided to resume my teaching studies, which I had abandoned when I married Liam. The public library became my second home. There, surrounded by books and other people who, like me, were seeking to improve their lives, I felt like I was recovering a part of myself that I had lost. One day, while organizing products in the store, I overheard two customers talking about a free business management course offered by the City Hall. Without thinking twice, I signed up. The course was at night, which meant even longer days, but each new thing I learned made me feel stronger, more capable. As the weeks went by, I noticed changes in me that went beyond the physical. The insecure girl who constantly sought the approval of others was disappearing. In her place emerged a woman who was not afraid to express her opinions, who valued her own judgment. I clearly remember the day I realized how much I had changed. I was in the store, serving a particularly difficult customer. In the past, his rude comments would have made me feel small and insignificant. But that day, I surprised myself by handling the situation calmly and assertively. When the client left, my boss congratulated me on how I had handled the situation. I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with the approval of others, but with the satisfaction of knowing that I had acted according to my own values. My relationship with my roommates was also a source of growth. We were a diverse group: Alejandro, a medical student, Maria, a freelance artist, and Jorge, a retiree who had decided to rent a room to cover his modest pension. At first, it was difficult for me to open up to them. The fear of rejection, of being judged for my past, kept me distant. But little by little, their gestures of kindness and unconditional acceptance began to break down my walls. One night, during an impromptu dinner in the shared kitchen, I found myself telling them my story. To my surprise, instead of pity or judgment, I received understanding and support. Maria hugged me tightly, Alejandro offered to help me with my studies, and Jorge simply said, "Girl, you have shown more strength than many will have in their entire lives." That night marked a before and after in my new life. I realized that I was not alone, that there were people willing to support me without expecting anything in return. It was a new concept for me, accustomed as I was to the conditional relationships of my previous life. As time went by, my self-confidence grew. I was no longer defined by my relationship with Liam or what Margaret thought of me. I began to rediscover passions that I had forgotten. I returned to painting, something I loved as a child but had put aside. On weekends, when I wasn't working or studying, I would escape to Malvarosa Beach with my drawing pad. There, facing the Mediterranean Sea, I felt free to express my emotions through art. My financial situation also gradually began to improve. With the knowledge acquired in the management course, I began to offer basic accounting services to small businesses in the neighborhood. It wasn't much, but each new client made me feel like I was building something of my own, something that no one could take away from me. One afternoon, while walking through the central market, I found myself in front of a flower stand. Without thinking, I bought a small bouquet of daisies. When I got home, I put them in a glass in my room. It was a small luxury, but it symbolized something important. I was no longer simply surviving, I was starting to live again. That night, sitting in my small room, surrounded by study books, with the scent of daisies filling the air, I allowed myself to dream about the future for the first time in a long time. They were no longer the naive dreams of a fairy tale life, but realistic aspirations based on my own effort and determination. I thought about the Emma I had been when I arrived at that hotel room months ago, scared and heartbroken. That Emma now seemed like a stranger. In her place was a woman who had discovered her own strength, who had learned that true value comes not from what others think of you, but from what you know you are capable of achieving. As I was getting ready for bed, I looked out the window at the lights of Valencia. The city that had once seemed like a scene of broken dreams now appeared like a blank canvas, full of possibilities. I didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. With a smile on my lips, I turned off the light. Tomorrow would be another day of hard work and study, but I no longer saw it as a burden. Every day was an opportunity to grow, to learn something new, to take another step towards the life I wanted to build for myself. And so, with a heart full of hope and determination, I fell asleep, ready to face whatever the new day might bring. The new life I had started wasn't perfect, it was full of challenges and difficult times, but it was mine. And that made her beautiful. 2 months had passed since that fateful night when my life took a 180-degree turn. The routine I had established felt like a lifeline in the middle of a turbulent sea. Every morning, I would get up at dawn, make coffee in the small shared kitchen, and head to the supermarket where I worked. The afternoons were dedicated to my studies and the small accounting jobs I had gotten. It wasn't a luxurious life, but it was mine, and it filled me with a pride I had never experienced before. It was on one of those seemingly normal mornings when everything changed again. I was in the supermarket warehouse, organizing a new shipment of products, when I felt my phone vibrate in my apron pocket. As I pulled it out, my heart skipped a beat. Liam's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I stood paralyzed, phone in hand, not knowing what to do. A part of me wanted to answer, to hear his voice one more time. But another part, the part that had grown grown stronger in these 2 months, knew better than to do it. With trembling hands, I rejected the call and returned to my work, trying to ignore the whirlwind of emotions that had been unleashed inside me. But Liam didn't give up. Throughout the day, my phone didn't stop ringing. Calls, texts, even a couple of emails. Each notification was like a small earthquake that threatened to destroy the stability I had worked so hard to build. That night, sitting in my small room, I allowed myself to read one of her messages. "Emma, please, we need to talk. I miss you. The house is empty without you." Words I would have once longed to hear now made me feel a mix of anger and sadness. Where was this regret when I was humiliated and thrown out of my own house? But the biggest surprise was yet to come. The next day, while I was on my break from work, I received a call from an unknown number. Something prompted me to answer, and I almost dropped the phone when I heard the voice on the other end of the line. "Emma, I'm Margaret," the voice said, sounding unrecognizable, unsure. I stayed silent, unable to process what was happening. Margaret, the woman who had treated me with disdain from day one, who had publicly humiliated me, was now calling me, sounding almost desperate. "Emma, I know I have no right to ask you for anything," Margaret continued at my silence. "But please, I need to talk. I've made a terrible mistake and I want to fix it." I felt like I was short of breath. Fix it? How could something like that be fixed? The images of that rainy day, my things scattered in the garden, Liam's indifference, everything came back to me with painful clarity. "I'm sorry, Margaret," I finally managed to say, my voice firmer than I expected. "But there is nothing to talk about." And with that, I hung up the phone. The next few days were a whirlwind. Liam and Margaret seemed to have made it their mission to contact me at all costs. Calls, messages, they even tried to reach me through old mutual friends. Each attempt at contact was like a reminder of the past I had left behind, a test of my newfound strength. One afternoon, as I was leaving my evening classes, I came face to face with Liam. He was standing next to my car, looking disheveled like I'd never seen him before. For a moment, I was paralyzed, all the memories and emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "Emma," he said, his voice breaking. "Please give me a chance to explain. I made the worst mistake of my life by allowing you to leave. I need you." I looked into the eyes of the man who had once been the center of my universe and, to my surprise, I felt nothing. No love, no hate, just a deep indifference. "Liam," I replied calmly, "there is nothing to explain. Your actions, or rather, your inaction, said it all. I don't need you in my life, and I would appreciate it if you would stop looking for me." The shocked expression on his face almost made me laugh. It was evident that he expected me to fall into his arms, grateful for the opportunity to return. But that Emma no longer existed. As the days passed, the calls and messages began to decrease. But the peace I expected to feel did not come. Instead, I found myself dealing with a roller coaster of emotions. There were moments when I felt powerful, proud of having stood my ground. Others in which the temptation to respond, to listen to their explanations, was almost irresistible. It was in one of those moments of weakness when I decided to talk to Dolores, my landlady. Over these months, she had become a kind of mother figure to me, always willing to listen and offer wise advice. "Look, little girl," he told me while we shared a coffee in his kitchen. "Sometimes forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for yourself. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it certainly doesn't mean putting yourself back in a situation that hurt you." His words resonated deeply with me. I realized that by refusing to listen to them, I was allowing Liam and Margaret to continue to have power over me. Maybe it was time to face the past once and for all. With that resolution in mind, I decided to answer Liam's next call. When my phone finally rang, I took a deep breath and answered it. "Emma, thanks for stopping by," Liam said, his voice mixed with relief and nervousness. "Can we meet? There's so much I need to tell you." We agreed to meet at a neutral cafe, a public place where I would feel safe. I chose a small establishment near the beach, a place that I had discovered on my solitary walks and that had become my refuge. The day of the meeting arrived faster than I expected. As I walked to the cafe, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. She was no longer the same woman who had left that house with a broken heart and a broken spirit. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to close this chapter of my life. Liam was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table on the terrace overlooking the sea. Watching him gave me a strange feeling, like I was looking at a stranger I once knew intimately. "Emma," he said, standing up, "thank you for coming." His voice trembled slightly, and I could see that he had lost weight. For a moment, I felt a pang of compassion, but I quickly pushed it away. I sat across from him, keeping my expression neutral. "You said you wanted to talk, Liam. I'm listening." For the next hour, Liam talked. He told me how he had realized the mistake he had made, how the house felt empty without me, how his mother was sorry and wanted to make peace. He talked about how he missed me, how he had realized that I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. I listened silently, observing the man who had once been the center of my world. And as I did, I realized something important. I no longer had any feelings for him. Not love, not hate, not even resentment. Just a deep indifference. When Liam finished talking, there was a moment of silence. I could see in his eyes that he expected an answer, perhaps even an immediate forgiveness. But I was no longer the woman who sought to please others at the expense of herself. "Thank you for your honesty, Liam," I finally said. "But what you describe is not love. It is comfort, it is fear of loneliness. True love does not allow someone to be humiliated and discarded as I was. Love protects, supports, respects." I saw how hope in his eyes faded, replaced by a mixture of shock and despair. "But Emma, we can fix it. We can start over. I love you." I shook my head, feeling a peace that I did not expect. "No, Liam. We cannot. And what you feel is not love. I have learned what true love is in these months. It is self-est love, respect for the same. And that is something that I am not willing to sacrifice to anymore. I got up, ready to leave. But after my encounter with Liam, I felt as if a huge weight had risen from my shoulders. For the first time since everything had happened, I felt truly free. It was no longer the shadow of the woman who had been, nor the victim of the circumstances. It was Emma, strong, resilient, and owner of my own destiny. However, I knew there was still a chapter to close: Margaret. Despite my initial reluctance, something inside me told me that I needed to face it to be able to move forward completely. Not for her, but for myself. I decided to respond to one of his messages, and we agreed to find ourselves in a park near my new home. I chose a public place, where I felt safe and in control. On the day of the encounter, I felt a mixture of nerves and determination. She was no longer the submissive and complacent daughter-in-law she had met. It was a new version of myself, and I was ready to face. When I arrived in the park, I saw Margaret sitting on a bank. He looked different, smaller in some way, as if the last months had also taken its toll on it. When he saw me, he stood up, his face a mixture of anxiety and something that he had never seen in her: shame. "Emma," he said in a trembling voice, "thanks for coming." I sat next to him, maintaining a prudent distance. "You said you wanted to speak, Margaret. I listened to you." During the following minutes, Margaret spoke non-stop. He told me how he had realized the mistake he had made, how the fault had been eating alive. He talked about sleepless nights, the tension that had developed between her and Liam, how the house that once considered her strength now felt empty and cold. "I never had to treat you like this," he said with tears in his eyes. "I was so obsessed with maintaining some status, a certain image, that I did not realize the damage I was causing. Not only to you, but to my own son, to our family." I listened in silence, watching the woman that once I had made me feel so small and insignificant. And while I did, I realized something surprising: I was no longer afraid of her anymore. "I won't even go." What I felt was a mixture of compassion and a deep sadness for all the time and energy that we had wasted in this meaningless power game. When Margaret finished speaking, there was a moment of silence. I could see in his eyes that he expected an answer, perhaps even an immediate forgiveness. But I was no longer the woman who sought the approval of others at all costs. "Thank you for your honesty, Margaret," I finally said. "I appreciate that you have recognized your mistakes. But I need you to understand something. The damage you did to me, that you and Liam did to me, go beyond simple apologies." I saw how hope in his eyes faded, replaced by a mixture of surprise and resignation. "What they did to me," I continued, "forced me to rediscover myself. To find a force that I did not know what I had. And therefore, in a strange way, I should thank you. Because without that experience, perhaps I would never have discovered who I am really." Margaret looked at me, clearly surprised by my words. "Emma, I don't know what to say. Does this mean that you forgive me?" I took a deep breath before answering. "Forgiveness is a process, Margaret. It is not something that I can give you at this time. What I can tell you is that I no longer have grudges. I have learned that resentment would only hurt myself. But I have also learned to value myself, to establish healthy limits." I saw how tears began to run through Margaret's cheeks. For a moment, I felt the impulse to comfort her, but it contained me. It was no longer my responsibility to manage their emotions. "I understand," Margaret finally said, drying the tears. "I don't deserve less. I just want you to know that I'm really sorry, Emma. And if you ever need something, anything, I'll be here." I nodded, recognizing his words but without promises. We said goodbye shortly after, and while I saw her get away, I felt a sense of closing that I had not experienced before. The days following my encounter with Margaret were a whirlwind of emotions. On the one hand, I felt released, as if I had finally cut the last bonds that united me to my past. On the other, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened, about how I had changed in recent months. One afternoon, while walking along La Malvarosa beach, I found myself thinking about the Emma that had been when I arrived in Valencia for the first time. That girl full of dreams and hopes, who believed in happy fairy and final stories. What would I say to that Emma if I could talk to her now? I would tell you that life is not always easy, that sometimes the people in whom you can trust the most. But I would also tell you that these disappointments do not define who you are. That within it there is a force that still does not know, a resilience that will surprise it. He would tell him about crying nights in a hotel room, but also about the mornings he woke up feeling stronger. I would tell him about the satisfaction of making a living for herself, the joy of rediscovering old passions and finding new ones. And above all, I would tell you that true love is not something that is in another person, but in the same. To learn to love and respect yourself is the most valuable gift that can be given to itself. While walking on the shore, with the sea breeze stroking my face, I realized that it was no longer that naive Emma, but she wasn't the wounded and bitter woman in which I could have become. It was a new version of myself, wiser, stronger, more complete. The days became weeks, and the weeks in months. My life continued its course, but now with a new perspective. My work in the supermarket was complemented with my teaching studies, which I had resumed with renewed enthusiasm. On weekends, I dedicated them to my little accounting work and my rediscovered passion for painting. One afternoon, while preparing my materials for an art class that had begun to teach in a local community center, I received an unexpected call. She was the director of a small primary school in the Cabanel neighborhood. "Miss Emma," the voice said on the other side of the line, "they have told me very well about you. We are looking for an assistant teacher for our art program and asked me if I would be interested in an interview." I felt how my heart accelerated. It was an opportunity that combined my two passions, teaching and art. Without hesitation, I accepted the invitation for the interview. The days before the interview were a whirlwind of emotions. I prepared my curriculum, I practiced possible questions in front of the mirror and carefully chose my outfit. The morning of the interview, while looking at me in the mirror, I saw a confident and safe woman of herself. A woman who had gone through a lot, but who had come stronger on the other side. The interview was better than I expected. The director, a kind woman named Carmen, seemed impressed not only by my skills, but also by my personal history. "Emma," he told me at the end of the interview, "I think you would be a wonderful addition to our team. Your passion and your resilience are exactly what we are looking for in our educators." I left school feeling in the clouds. Regardless of the result, I knew I had given my best. And that, in itself, was a triumph. A week later, I received the call that would change my life once more. I had been offered the position. With tears of joy in my eyes, I accepted immediately. That night, sitting in my little room, I reflected on the path that had taken me here. I thought about Liam, in Margaret, in the life I had left behind. I no longer felt pain or bitterness when thinking about them. Instead, he felt gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, by the force I had discovered in myself. While looking out the window towards the lights of Valencia, I realized that this city, which once had been the stage of my greatest disappointments, had now become the canvas of my rebirth. Here I had learned to love myself, to value my strength and my resilience. The future extended before me, full of possibilities. It was no longer the Emma that sought its value in the approval of others. She was a strong, independent woman, ready to face any challenge that life could present. With a smile on my lips, I prepared to sleep. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of my life. A life that I had built with my own hands, a life of which I could be proud. And that, I realized, was everyone's greatest triumph. 5 years have passed since that day I accepted work at the Cabanel Elementary School. 5 years of growth, challenges and innumerable joys. Today, while I prepare for a new day, I look around and I can barely believe how much my life has changed. My little apartment in the center of Valencia is a testimony of my trip. The walls are decorated with my own paintings, each telling a part of my story. In a corner, an easel patiently expects my next work. The sunrise light is filtered through the curtains, illuminating the space that I have created for myself. This is not just a place to live, it is my sanctuary, my refuge, the physical manifestation of my dreams and aspirations. I go to the kitchen to prepare my morning coffee, a routine that I now enjoy in the tranquility of my own space. While the aroma of the coffee is fresh by the air, I cannot avoid smiling when I think about how far I have come. 3 years ago, I made the decision to leave my work at primary school to pursue a dream that I didn't even know. With the savings I had accumulated and a small loan, I opened my own interior design study. It was terrifying at first, throwing myself into the emptiness of entrepreneurship, but something inside me knew it was the right path. The first months were difficult. There were nights in which I hesitated about my decision, moments when insecurity threatened to overwhelm. But every time I felt I was going to give up, I remembered how far I had come, the force I had discovered in myself. And he moved on. Little by little, my business began to grow. My focus on creating spaces that were not only beautiful, but also reflected the personality and needs of my clients, began to gain recognition. I started with small projects, a room here, an office there. But with each completed job, my reputation grew. One day, I received a call that would change the course of my career. A woman named Sophia, owner of a small boutique hotel chain, had heard of my work. "I wanted you to completely redesign one of its hotels in the old town of Valencia." I remember the mix of emotion and terror that I felt when I visited the hotel for the first time. It was a beautiful building, full of history and character, but I desperately needed a renewal. While traveling the rooms, listening to Sophia's ideas and sharing mine, I felt that something clicks on me. This was the type of project with which he had dreamed, an opportunity to create something truly special. I tirelessly worked on that project for months. Every detail, from the choice of colors to the selection of furniture, was carefully considered. I wanted each room to tell a story, that each space invited guests to immerse themselves in the rich history and culture of Valencia. The day of the grand inauguration came faster than I expected. While traveling the finished hotel, seeing how my ideas had come alive, I felt a wave of pride and satisfaction that I had never experienced before. And when I saw the faces of amazement and delight of the first guests, I knew that I had found my true vocation. The success of that project opened many doors. Suddenly, my little study was flooded with applications. Companies, hotels, restaurants, they all wanted a piece of the magic he had created. I had to hire staff, move to a larger office. My dream had not only come true, I had exceeded my wildest expectations. But with success came new challenges. Stress, long hours of work, the constant pressure to overcome my latest designs. There were times when I felt overwhelmed, moments when I longed for the simplicity of my ancient life. It was in one of those moments of doubt when I decided to do something that I had been postponing for a long time, to help other women who had gone through situations similar to mine. I began to offer free workshops on weekends, teaching basic design and decoration skills to women who were rebuilding their lives after abusive relationships or difficult situations. These workshops became my anchor, my reminder of why I had started this trip in the first place. Seeing these women recover their trust, discovering their own passions and talents, I was filled with a joy that no professional success could match. One of these women, Marta, became my protected and eventually my commercial partner. Its creativity and energy perfectly complemented my skills, and together we took the business to new heights.